Hi, everyone, and welcome to the In the Shoes of podcast, where I make it my goal to see life as much as possible from someone else's point of view. Just like we all have a unique heartbeat, every single one of us sees life only from our own perspectives. Think about it. Can you see and process life exactly as Elon Musk sees and processes life? The answer is you can't, and it applies to every living conscious being here on this pale blue dot. And it's In the Shoes of episode time. And today I have an old friend by the name of Josh Harvey, who is a self-proclaimed burned out night shift ER nurse, aka trauma junkie. So you're going to find out that he's much more than that. Obviously, we're going to delve into some pretty heavy stuff here and some lighter stuff. But to give you an idea, electron transport systems, collective hypomania, vagus nerve communication, suicidal contagions, alcoholism, earthing, and more. We're kind of started, but not officially, but whatever. Have you heard of Wim Hof, the Wim Hof method, or the Iceman?
Oh, definitely.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Well, Tim Ferriss talks about him.
Oh, okay.
But I do have his book. I bought it a couple weeks ago. What the real benefit of that cold therapy is tweaking your vagus nerve.
Oh, that's right. You're kind of an expert on the vagus nerve.
Definitely.
Yeah.
That's kind of my whole mission in life, is to help people fix their vagus nerve.
Can you explain, just before we even get into that, what a vagus nerve is?
The human body has two vagus nerves. It's a pair, so vagi, and that's cranial nerve number 10. And you may have heard of heart rate variability.
Yep.
Extreme athletes are checking their heart rate variability. Often first thing in the morning, it tells you how stressed you are, how much stress you have. And by stress, I'm not talking about some vague emotional state of being. I'm talking about physiologic stress.
Right.
And that a huge stressor is an extreme workout.
Yep.
So if you go run a marathon today, that is a tremendous amount of physiologic stress. And then your heart rate variability would tell you the next morning basically whether you should work out or not again that day and how recovered you are.
Mm-hmm.
And so that heart rate variability is the vagus nerve and its influence on the heart.
Oh, okay.
So the vagus nerve are the brakes to the heart, basically. It's what slows the heart rate down.
Mm-hmm.
And this is all talking about the parasympathetic nervous system.
Yeah, okay.
Opposite, the parasympathetic is the sympathetic nervous system. And that's what we think of when we're talking about fight or flight.
Yeah.
So a bear jumps out of the woods to eat you, and you freak out, take off running, or maybe pull out your Bowie knife and fight the bear.
Right.
But your fight or flight is kicked in. It's all revved up. And that is the sympathetic nervous system.
That's the sympathetic, not the parasympathetic. And so you're saying the vagus nerve, does it moderate the parasympathetic system?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And so that is the rest and digest system, the feed or breed system.
Okay.
So the opposite or antidote to stress is the parasympathetic nervous system.
Okay, so if it notices that you're stressed, it will do something to compensate for that stress somehow? Yeah. When you told me one day when I was really stressed out and I was traveling in, I don't know, I think I was in Thailand or Malaysia or something, and I was texting you about how stressed out I was about something. And I was telling you about how on a Friday I went for a run and I was extraordinarily just peaceful, blissed out beyond words. And you told me that it was probably my vagus nerve that kind of kicked in, or my parasympathetic nervous system that kind of kicked in to say, hey, we need to chill out, otherwise bad things are going to happen. Is that the gist of it, kind of?
That's exactly it. And we call that parasympathetic overshoot, which is the exact same thing that happens to a possum when it plays dead.
Oh.
So if a possum is confronted with a life-threatening situation, bam, it is paralyzed, immobilized, can't move, because the vagus nerve of the possum shuts his entire body down.
Uh-huh.
And that's called parasympathetic overshoot. And the interesting thing about overshoot is that is what there's a seminal research article from 1990 by this guy named Baumeister entitled Suicide as Escape from Self. And it's not entirely true, but it was very profound at the time in 1990 when he wrote this, and he talked about this phenomenon called cognitive deconstruction.
Okay.
That is when basically your brain stops working.
Really? Well, doesn't that equate to death if your brain stops working?
Well, it is highly lethal because that's when people kill themselves.
So what do you mean when you say your brain stops working? What do you mean by that?
Well, we can actually see this on functional MRI brain scans now. This comes from studies of alcoholics, abstinent alcoholics. When they are confronted with a high amount of stress, which means their vagus nerve is shutting down, their prefrontal cortex, the front part of your brain right behind your forehead, the part of your brain that makes you human, in the abstinent alcoholic, it just simply turns off.
Oh, really?
When confronted with a high amount of stress.
Wow. So are you going back to like the primal, like a reptile brain then at that point in time?
Definitely. That's exactly what's happening.
Okay.
So basically, instead of your human brain working, you're in crocodile brain mode.
Oh.
And the only thing the crocodile brain is good for is instinctual reflexive behaviors. So a crocodile sees something move and it automatically tries to eat it. It's just very, they call it the appetitive drive. And basically what your prefrontal cortex, the human part of your brain, is good for is executive functioning. And executive functions there's dozens of them, but things like inhibition, your ability to inhibit a behavior, for example, is an executive function. And so it just stops working.
Wow. Sometimes mine really stops working. There are just points in life where that really happens.
Yep. And that's kind of in a roundabout way modulated by the vagus nerve.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. And the vagus nerve is fascinating. In the human, it has evolved to where we have 3 distinct branches, at least, of the vagus nerve. And this is a guy named Stephen Porges came up with the polyvagal theory. And what that means is it's all based on evolution. And over the millennia, we have evolved a newer branch and then an even newer branch. And so there's at least 3 branches, each one newer than the previous one. And so the most recently evolved branch of the human vagus nerve is responsible for social interaction.
Really? There's just one nerve, like vagus nerve, that's responsible just for that, for social interaction.
Yeah, the vagus nerve has branches throughout your body. So when you think one nerve, it's branched throughout your entire body. And we know, for example, acupuncture has been around for 3,000 years.
Yep.
Well, when you map every site that they are trained to puncture with a needle, every single site is within millimeters of a branch of the vagus nerve.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. And so that's the benefit of acupuncture and why it actually does help people. It's not a dramatic treatment effect, but it does. For example, you can have your ear pierced with an acupuncture needle for smoking cessation.
Really?
Because there's a little branch of the vagus nerve called the auricular branch that runs through your ear, and it seems to help some people quit smoking.
Neat. I mean, I just got a Groupon for an acupuncture, so if this is going to be, I'm going to put to the test, see what happens.
Yeah, definitely. I've always meant to do it. I just haven't got around to it. But
so do you think that we can influence, kind of like going back to the Wim Hof, it seems like his belief, and it seems like he's pretty much kind of proven it too, is that he can override some of our fight or flight functions, some of our parasympathetic or sympathetic reactions to life, and even kind of influence how our body reacts to viruses and things of that nature.
Oh, definitely. The vagus nerve is responsible for immune system functioning. It's the brakes of the heart. And we've known this for years, probably 20 years ago when I was first taking ACLS, which is called Advanced Cardiac Life Support. If you have a kid that comes in with a heart arrhythmia called SVT, their heart's just beating way too fast for no
Yeah.
apparent reason. It could be running like I had a kid once whose heart rate was 240,
What?
running way too fast for no reason. Kid looks terrible. There's a chance he might die. So we got to slow that heart down. And there's various ways to do that. But one of the earliest things that we used to do is simply dunk their face in a bucket of ice water.
Oh, really? You were using the Wim Hof method without knowing about even Wim Hof at that point in time.
Yeah, this was before Wim Hof named it Wim Hof. Doctors have been using an ice bucket to slow rapid heart rate, and often quite dramatic. The poor kid thinks they're dying, of course, but their heart slows down because what the ice water is doing is powerfully stimulating the vagus nerve.
Yeah.
And the vagus nerve is the brakes to the heart.
Wow.
It can actually be dangerous. You can slow your heart rate a little too much, even if you're not careful.
So, Josh, where are you currently living right now?
I currently live in Nebraska.
Cool.
Lincoln, Nebraska. Home of the Huskers.
Yeah. And Josh and I actually met in Nebraska. He was him and his brother moved there to Nebraska from, where was it? Pasadena? Is that right?
Yep, Pasadena, California.
Nice. So from there, it's been a wild ride. What shoes are you wearing today?
I am glad you asked. I'm wearing a pair of Earth Runner sandals.
Earth Runner sandals? Whoa.
Yeah, I'm not really wearing them actually because we started talking.
Yeah, me too. Same thing. That's probably how it's going to go.
Out of character. No, but I love these barefoot running sandals. The fascinating thing with these, they're handmade in I believe California. They're not super expensive. I think I paid $80 for mine. But the kind of neat thing, the little catchy part to the Earth Runners is that they have some built-in copper grounding wires.
What? Okay.
There's actually fascinating science building on this idea of earthing or grounding, which means that kind of from an evolutionary perspective, our feet were meant to touch the ground.
Yeah.
That's how we evolved over the last million years. And so with the invention of these high-tech running shoes and things, our feet are no longer in contact with Mother Earth. And there actually seems to be a little bit of science behind that. And I don't quite understand it, but it has to do with every cell in your body is fueled by mitochondria. And in the mitochondria, this process called the electron transport chain is taking place. And we actually collect electrons from the ground.
Oh, wow. Really? And this is proven stuff.
Well, the science is still out there a little bit. It's not super robust, but I think if you just look around, you'll see people benefiting from grounding. There was a recent study that showed barefoot running increases working memory by something like 14%.
Whoa.
Which is a huge thing. So basically, you go outside and run around with no shoes on, your brain is working better.
Yeah.
What kind of sense does that make?
Makes no sense on the surface.
Science doesn't lie. And so I was walking around downtown Lincoln on Friday, just kind of enjoying myself and collecting data. I'm a people watcher, and I am very interested in why people do what they do. And I walked past a homeless man sleeping on the ground. And it occurred to me, he is gaining some benefit from sleeping on the ground. I know this because the homeless shelter is only a couple blocks away. He could very easily have been sleeping inside in a warm environment. But for whatever reason, he chose to sleep right there on the ground. And Edwin Schneiden is a man I want to introduce you to. He's the founder of the entire science of suicidology.
Oh, okay.
He was the world's first suicidologist. Why do people kill themselves?
Yeah.
Edwin Steinman has passed away. He wrote his last book when he was 88 years old.
Well, that's awesome.
So he's written something like 60 books on the subject.
Eesh.
And he says, his quote that I live by is that therapy is anything that helps.
Yeah, right.
Anything that helps. And I believe that for this man, sleeping on the ground made him feel better. For whatever reason, it made him feel
just
better.
having the nice cool air on his face, maybe being able to see the stars. I don't know.
Yeah. And potentially grounding with Mother Earth, tweaking his electron transport chains and all his mitochondria. I don't know.
Yeah.
But so that's what I do have a pair of Earth runners, because I like the idea of running barefoot, but we also do see a lot of injuries in the ER from people stepping on
yeah,
stuff.
I'm sure.
Get outside and go out and take off down the trail barefoot, and then they step on a piece of glass and can't run for a month.
Yeah.
I think you have to be smart about it.
I'm going to have to look into some Earth runners then. Connect me to Mother Earth a little bit. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Cool. So the next question, and these are just kind of questions I want to ask everybody in this podcast, but I want to know who you are today. And if you were, let's say you were pretending to be someone else and you had to speak to about yourself in the third person, and someone asked you, so tell me about Josh Harvey. Who the hell is he? What would you say? What would you tell them?
Well, Josh is a registered nurse, currently a mental health nursing instructor at the community college. He's been doing that, teaching about mental health, psych type stuff for the last 10 years, since 2006. But really at heart, he's just a burned out, crusty, sarcastic, night shift ER nurse, a former trauma junkie with a little whiff of post-traumatic stress disorder, just like all of those guys have, and a large whiff of alcoholism. So that's who he is.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and just run with that then. Can you tell me a bit about how and where you were brought up?
Kind of my formative years were in Pasadena, California. We lived there until my freshman year in high school. And so we're the only white family on our block. And I sort of grew up with this fear of drive-by shooting and things like that, and fell asleep at night listening to sirens and the distant sound of gunfire. A lot of those inner city areas are still a war zone. I talked to an ER nurse from UCLA Trauma Center in Los Angeles, and in her career, she worked there for something like 15 years. They saw more gunshot wounds in that ER than the entire Vietnam War.
What?
So where the real people are dying and things like that are often not where the news media tells us they are dying. So that was kind of the background, and then landed in Nebraska.
What year was this when you landed in Nebraska?
Maybe 1989.
Yeah, sounds about right.
Maybe.
Around some good Metallica albums around that time. And then you started teaching me a little bit about how to actually throw a little bit of rhythm and funk and hip hop into my drumming, as opposed to just straight up speed metal type things and thrash.
Yeah, that's a funny story that I tell, and I've exaggerated it over the years.
Right.
It's kind of got a life of its own now after retelling it. But it's basically a real high school musical sort of a deal, where the skinny blonde kid shows up, and you and the other best drummer in town, Jeremy Dutcher. This is how I tell it. Like, oh, so you're a drummer. Let's see what you got.
Yeah. Right.
Like, well, okay. I guess I could. No, I don't know. It's not true, but it's pretty
That's
funny.
awesome. Well, that could be another podcast in and of itself. Just like music in high school. I don't know if anybody would really listen to that one, but Well, how much do you think that your upbringing contributed to who you are today?
Well, I honestly don't think it contributed much at all. My real formative years, I would say, were the nights I spent in the ER. I did that for probably about a decade, 10 years, working 3 or 4 12-hour shifts a week in the ER. I've never taken a vacation, always just worked.
Oh wow, this whole time you still haven't taken a vacation. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, no, I really have never gone on a vacation. I should do that. It's on my bucket list.
You've got to do that. We've got to go. I think you would enjoy that, man.
Yeah, but that being said, I thoroughly enjoy what I do for a living
Yeah.
too. And so I'm one of those guys that honestly, I don't feel like I have a job because I can't believe they let me do what I do every day. So there's that. That's nice. But
Oh, that's awesome.
as far as childhood events influencing adulthood outcomes, a lot of people really latch on to their parents' parental style of their cold and distant father or whatever, or their codependent mother,
Yeah.
things like that. But there's actually, this comes from the field of positive psychology. The research really shows that childhood events have very little influence on adult functioning, which is surprising, but it is a testament to, I believe, the resiliency of the human organism.
Oh yeah.
We tend to bounce back, and often we bounce back even stronger and better than before.
Yeah. I feel like there is a way that a lot of people can, whatever happened in the childhood, sometimes we can let that become part of our identity today, which really isn't necessarily beneficial. But once again, I don't know that I can judge that whatsoever, but
Oh, no, I don't think so. I think for some people it is beneficial. It makes them feel better to blame their parents or whatever. And there are, of course, definitely cases of severe
oh yeah.
continued child abuse and things like that. I'm not talking
No,
about
yeah, yeah.
that, but
Okay. Yeah.
but as far as like the reason I have anxiety, for example,
Hmm.
I like to say, oh, it's from working in the ER, and I have literally seen 1,000 different ways someone can die.
Yeah.
But that's not actually true at all. I had anxiety before that,
Right.
and I most likely inherited it from my
Right.
mom, who inherited it from her grandma. So it's just a long history and largely genetic. Some of it's not genetic, and we can influence it, but some of it is.
Yeah. That makes sense. Wow. So that kind of leads me to my next question then. How did you decide to become an ER nurse?
I became a nurse initially because I didn't have a choice. I had a new baby and no decent job, and for whatever reason, it seemed like this was the only thing for me was to go to LPN school. I became a licensed practical nurse. It was just a simple 1 year degree, and suddenly I was making a little bit more money, and then that led me to become a registered nurse, making a little bit more money. Not excellent money, but it's at least a
Hmm.
profession.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So I never wanted to be an ER nurse because I'm a big coward at heart. I'm terrified of everything all the time. And so I was an ICU nurse, and ICU nurses, we tend to have a decent amount of obsessive compulsive disorder. I think good ICU nurses fit the criteria for OCD.
Yeah.
We like to have all of our lines and tubes in perfect order and lined up and everything well controlled, and we'll kind of fuss over just 1 or 2 patients for an entire 12-hour shift, and nothing is too dramatic. We like to think that we're super badass because we're ICU nurses, but there's never anything real. Our patient might code and die. We do CPR, we shock them, but then they come back. But it's only one patient. The ER is a completely unpredictable, chaotic environment that you cannot control. Absolutely
Yeah.
terrifying.
Can you go into that a little bit?
I think there's a couple of things that TV tries to capture the just insane chaos of an ER, but it just can't capture what is really happening. Let's say during flu season, one flu season, we had an additional 1,700 patients check in over the month with just flu symptoms. So you're just overrun. You've got people stacked up in the back hallways. Everyone needs you now. And as an ER nurse, your only priority is to figure out who is the most likely to die in the next 2 minutes or
Oh,
so.
wow.
And so you have to triage everything that you do. Every step that you take has to be with the priority patients in mind.
Yeah.
And so the other component to the ER that television cannot capture is your sense of smell. Your sense of smell is, from an evolutionary perspective, it was the oldest and first developed sense.
Oh, really? Before eyesight even.
Yeah, yep. And so actually that nerve, your olfactory nerve, is the only nerve that bypasses the thalamus, which is the filter in your brain that filters stuff out. The olfactory nerve doesn't get filtered out because it's the oldest from an evolutionary perspective. That's why crocodiles and snakes and different animals are good at smelling stuff.
What about fish? They don't really smell, do they? Or do they?
I don't think so. I honestly don't know.
Oh, okay. Well, anyway, let's probably go down another rabbit hole there, but yeah.
So your sense of smell is tied directly into your amygdala, which is the emotion processing area of your brain. Really strong emotions are modulated by the amygdala.
Yeah.
And so you can't capture that on television, what the mixture of blood and alcohol smells like, for example. That's a smell that's permanently etched in my brain.
Really?
Vomit, you can't capture the smell of vomit.
Probably a combination of vomit and alcohol and blood at the same time. That might have been a common kind of mixture.
Yeah, a very common smell. Just a very common smell that has emotional ramifications.
Yeah.
But that's why, just off on a tangent, when we're talking about quitting smoking, this is a little key that WebMD will not tell you. If you get on WebMD and you're like, I quit smoking and my sense of smell is returning, they'll be all like, this is a great thing. It's not necessarily a good thing. If the smell of autumn reminds you of some child that got shot to death that you did CPR on, you don't want that smell to come back.
Yeah.
You don't want those memories. Smoking is a simple way to eliminate that problem. You can't smell. I'm counseling people who are trying to quit smoking. I'm like, just be aware that you're going to have some memories that you had long forgotten about come flooding back, and that may make you want to go buy some cigarettes.
Right.
If you're aware that might happen, then you can sort of prepare for it and recognize it and say, oh, this just happened. I haven't thought of that former lover, and you smell perfume that she used to wear,
Yep.
Hadn't had that thought or emotion for years.
Yeah. So how much has that affected you then? The ER, and you probably have, I'm sure you have a whole list of smells that you associate with ER.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that. I can't say that it's affected me, horribly one way or the other. It has changed the trajectory of my life for certain. But what was really the culprit was the drinking myself to sleep at night.
That was after you get off work or whatever, you'd come home and just pour yourself a couple martinis or whatever.
Yeah. That was, I believe, a much bigger impact. And so we tend to really minimize that when we're talking about post-traumatic stress disorder and things like that. The problem with alcohol before bed is it really puts the damper on REM sleep.
Yeah.
So you might fall asleep easily because you're drunk or whatever. And you might sleep a long time, but it's not a restful sleep, because during REM sleep is when our brain processes memories, for example. And basically that's the phase of sleep in which our brain heals itself.
Okay.
Other phases, the deeper phases of sleep, like the non-REM, that's when our physical body recovers. Things like growth hormone are secreted. That's when our muscles build. During non-REM sleep, the REM sleep is vital for memory consolidation and learning and processing emotions. If you eliminate that phase of your sleep with alcohol or benzodiazepine, you're going to struggle with symptoms of what looks like post-traumatic stress disorder. So,
And so how long did this go on where, and I think this is very, I think a lot of people can relate to this, because a lot of people, and even in jobs that maybe it's not an ER where, wow, crazy stuff happening. You never know what to expect, but even just the drudgery of, like, for me, I think sometimes there'd be, you'd be working something and you just, wow, kind of, just the mundane aspect of it. And you just felt like, well, I need a little bit of a something else to get me through the day. And so you have a couple of drinks or more than a couple, as was often the case with me. So how long did it go on for you?
Years and years, but I can't say exactly at what point it became a problem.
Yeah.
And part of that is because of the impact on memory that alcohol and benzos have on a person. You can't ask a Xanax addict how many Xanax they took in any given day, because Xanax itself is an amnesiac.
Oh, wow.
So they're not lying to you. They just simply
Just
can't
have no
remember.
idea. Wow.
And it causes retrograde amnesia, which is fascinating. So if you pop a benzodiazepine, your memory for maybe 2 hours prior to taking that is gone. So not only can you not formulate or create new memories, but your previous 2 hours is gone as well. And so a lot of people don't recognize that and don't even realize they have a benzo problem because they simply can't remember. Well, I have no idea how many.
Wow, that sounds like it could turn into a really interesting and probably not so good cycle right there.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. And so, in addition to, like, I don't know how you made the switch. It seems like at some point in time you were in ER and ICU, and then you started working in a psych ward over in, was it Grand Island or Hastings, Nebraska?
Yeah.
Okay. When did you do that? When did you switch over, or did you switch over? Was it just a combination? You were working there and as an ER nurse, or?
I was doing both for a lot of years. Basically, the way I fell into becoming the psych instructor at that college, as a different college than where I'm at now, they had no one apply for the job. And I was friends with the dean there because I was doing some part-time. I was teaching like 1 day a week for them.
Mm-hmm.
And no one applied for their mental health nursing job. And they had a whole year worth of students lined up to graduate as RNs, and they had no instructor.
Oh, wow.
And so I said, well, I'll do it.
Yeah.
Sure, sign me up. And one of my ER doctors printed a research article because we had to prove to the State Board of Nursing that that I currently took care of psychiatric patients, even though I did not work in an actual psych ward at that time. I was just an ER nurse.
Yeah.
And he printed off research that says at least 50% of night shift ER patients are there purely for psych reasons.
Oh, well, there you go. There's your in.
Whether it's a psychotic break or substance abuse, that's why they're in the ER. It's for mental health. And so the State Board of Nursing said, yeah, you have the expertise. Go ahead and teach psych. And so that's how I got started. Then I did I had to get myself up to speed and just reading tons of research over the years.
Oh, yeah.
Learning as I go, kind of.
That's pretty fascinating. As I'm always fascinated by neurological disorders, of course, just even from having a little bit of little bit of mental muck ups here and there. Can you tell me a little bit more about working in the psych ward, how it's affected you, what you've learned, some of your, I guess, big takeaways, how it's maybe influenced even your worldview?
I think it, between the psych ward and the ER, it's given me hopefully a down-to-earth approach to life. That has changed my perspective on life. I get 2 common questions from my nursing students. I've had maybe 400 or 500 registered nurses go through my class, and the number one question is, what the fuck is wrong with me?
Yeah. Oh, it's from the nursing students. They're asking you what's wrong with them.
Yeah. I'm not talking about psych patients. I'm talking about
right. The actual students.
Professionals.
Yeah. And so what do you tell them?
I said, well, the nice thing is I'm not a doctor. I'm a nurse. I can't make a diagnosis. The easy cop out. And when this says MD on this name tag, then come to me, but it doesn't. I'm a nurse.
Right.
I can't give a diagnosis. So that's nice. A little cop out. But the other thing of it is, I don't know. People will worry, maybe I have antisocial personality disorder. Well, simply by asking that question, or worrying about it pretty much means you don't have that
Oh, yeah.
problem.
All right.
And that's one of the number one predictors of more morbidity with all of our different mental illnesses is lack of insight.
What do you mean?
So a patient with
Hmm.
schizophrenia who knows he has schizophrenia is going to do way
Oh, yeah.
better in life than a patient who doesn't know he has it.
Yeah, most definitely. Anytime you're cognizant of what's actually going on inside of you, or being able to see, yeah, because otherwise, if you're just in the throes of something, I can imagine. I mean, I can only relate to it in my own way, and like with OCD, when I didn't know what it was, I just thought, wow, I'm just like messed up. I don't know what the heck. It's all this anxiety and thoughts and whatever. But yeah,
So one of my proprietary catchphrases is if you got it, own it. Life will be so much
yeah,
better.
just own it.
You suddenly realize I'm bipolar. I'm a bipolar borderline,
Yeah.
whatever. Life will be so much better if you own up to it, learn as much as you can about that, and then I think you will end up happier in the long run. And the second most common question is, should I leave?
Should I
And
leave?
people wanting relationship advice.
Oh, really? You get students that are like just seeking out relationship advice from you.
Yeah, and that in itself I consider to be a boundary violation.
Right. That is really interesting. It's almost like you need to do a self-help course or something instead of, or
Yeah,
in addition
yeah.
to this.
But basically, the answer to that is no idea. I have no idea
Yeah.
if you should leave. And so that's kind of funny because that's the name of a book written by a psychiatrist. Should you leave?
Right.
And he just discusses that exact question because he gets it all the time too in therapy. Is should I leave my husband? Should I leave my wife? He's a blah 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 blah. And then the basic answer, according to the book, Peter Kramer is the author. By the end, he's like, I have no idea.
Right. Seriously.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if you should
And
leave.
so working and then you worked actually in the psych ward too, in addition to just teaching, you worked with patients, right?
Yeah,
Cool.
yeah.
And I know you probably, of course, there's the HIPAA code and all that stuff. You can't really probably delve into a lot of that, but I imagine you had to have seen some pretty crazy stuff, and I imagine it had to have affected your psyche in some form or fashion.
Yeah, definitely. So I probably saw more just batshit crazy stuff when I was an
Oh,
ER
really?
nurse,
Okay.
honestly. Yeah, because the truly sick people actually don't end up on the psych ward. They have to be what we call medically stable to end up on the psych
Oh,
ward.
okay.
So the guys who, let's say, they take a knife and eviscerate themselves and pull their small intestines out, they're not going to end up on the psych ward. They're going to have to go to surgery and end up in the ICU.
Wow. And
So
you've seen this.
yeah, the truly bizarre things, honestly, we don't see in the psych ward because they're not medically stable. I could tell a story after story of things like that.
Yeah. Wow. Is there anything you could tell us that stood out right now without violating, I don't know, whatever you can't violate?
Yeah, I don't want to tell too many stories because the interesting thing about healthcare is it's such a small world, and I found that when I do tell stories, people always know people who know.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, totally. I just thought I'd
It's
throw it out
pretty
there, see
interesting.
if this, but
I will say a couple
okay.
things. If you want to get six pack abs and truly look
Yeah.
amazing, just combine steroids, anabolic steroids, and methamphetamine.
Really? That's all you have to do.
The meth will shred you. You'll be ripped, 3% body fat. The steroids, you're going to bulk up, look amazing.
Wow.
You will also be completely batshit
Yep.
crazy, just psychotic. And so the few times when I've truly felt in danger for my life was these humongous bodybuilders who were just completely psychotic. And I've had a couple guys come after me for various reasons.
Oh, really?
So, yeah,
Wow.
a few times I felt afraid. One guy was a former professional football player, actually, developed a meth habit. So it's very interesting. But
Yeah. Yeah, that would be interesting.
um, so one other thing, I think to answer your question, how has this changed my
Yeah.
worldview? This idea of demon possession. uh, that's something that I get questions about a lot. Like, isn't schizophrenia just demon possession?
Hmm. Well, you actually get questions like that a lot.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, there's still people that believe this. And the thing with that psychosis and schizophrenia and things like that, hearing voices, is that we're starting to be able to see with functional MRI the exact part of the brain that's not working correctly. And that's the same part that processes hearing. Um, just a little module that tells you that this voice is coming from inside your head. Like we all talk to ourselves inside of our brains.
Oh, of course.
Um, but that little module is dysfunctional, and so they can't tell that it's their own process. It sounds like a scary man's voice coming from outside their head.
Wow, that's probably the best explanation I've ever heard of that phenomenon. Wow. Okay. Yeah. Go ahead. That was good.
Yeah, yeah. And so a lot of times when I explain that to people, they're, well, that's interesting. So it's not demons? Well, probably not, especially considering the fact that we can recreate psychosis by taking, hallucinogenics or whatever. We can have very similar experiences. In fact, in the ER, we can't tell the difference between a first psychotic break in schizophrenia and drug-induced psychotic break.
Yeah.
We had a rash of junior high kids robo-tripping one summer.
What's robo tripping?
That's where they take Robitussin,
Oh,
DM, the dextromethorphan in
yeah.
Robitussin. If you take high amounts of it, it's a hallucinogen, and they just become completely psychotic. And um, it's usually not described as a good trip. Most people are like, "Holy crap, I never want to do that
Right.
again."
Wow.
But so they would come in robo tripping, and we honestly can't tell whether this is schizophrenia or drugs.
Really? So they're kind of doing case studies right there for you. Really?
Yeah, that right there is telling me it's not demons if we can do it to ourselves just by
Right.
drinking too much NyQuil or whatever.
Veering off a little bit, I did want to make sure I asked, and probably and do a few plugs for you here too, because you've written like how many books now have you written? Where are you at now with that?
I have a couple of published books on Kindle you can get. One is called Mindful Triage, Positive Psychology and Life in the ER. It's just a short little book. Where I'm currently at with writing is just hammering out my word count. I'm not really trying to conquer the world and solve all the problems. I just want to see if I can write a book a month.
Oh, one book a month. That's awesome.
Yeah, I did do that in
Are you
2015.
serious? You wrote a
Um,
book a month in 2015.
yeah, but that's based on my word count of 50,000 words per month. Um, and that's just something I've done for years. And so in 2015, I achieved that goal. I wrote 50,000 words a month. And in November, I wrote 100,000. I just wanted to see if I could
Oh
double it
yeah.
up. And then in 2016, I kind of fell off the writing bandwagon a little bit. And that was because I was building a new course at the college and different things, just doing other creative endeavors.
Yeah.
And so I'm back on my word count goal for this year. And I've changed things up this year. I'm taking a screenwriting
Oh
class,
really?
and I'm just thoroughly enjoying
Oh,
that.
that's awesome, man. Wow. I may need to ask you for some help at some point in time then for with regard to screenwriting. That's actually really cool that you mentioned that.
Yeah, that I signed up for the class, and then I'm also in grad school, and working two jobs. And so I thought, I'm too busy. I don't want to go, but this has been on my bucket list for about 10
Yeah.
years. And so I just drug myself to class on a Monday evening. And it was literally a watershed moment of my life where, have you ever had a moment where you knew your life would never be the same from this point forward, but you were conscious of it happening in real time
Yeah,
while
I
it
mean,
happened?
I think I have.
Most of those events, like, in recollection, as you think back, oh, that was a watershed moment. My life changed its trajectory at that point, but I wasn't aware of it at the
Yeah.
time. Maybe 5, 10 years later, it's like, oh, my choice to become an ER nurse changed my life, but I wasn't aware of
Right.
it at the time. But when my first screenwriting class, I was aware of it happening in real time. It really freaked me out.
Wow. You could actually see the whatever kind of emotions that were
my
happening.
future
You
self,
could, yeah.
my future self has changed
Wow.
today.
That's kind of awesome. I want to, wow, maybe at some point I want to talk to you more about your screenwriting for sure. Because I have some ideas myself too, and I could use your input. And you're making me want to go back to school. Man, this is, anyway. But you're working on right now a book about biohacking, right?
Yeah, I have two books in the works. One is biohacking as the solution for alcoholism, or biohacking for alcoholics.
Mm-hmm.
And I finished that book a couple of years ago. And by finish, I mean it's about 40,000 words. But I decided
Really?
it's all crap. And I'm so
You're just like throwing it out.
I want to.
Time to jettison that.
Yeah, it's got some good points, but then I've learned so much in the last 2-3 years, that I just want to sort of really. But the one I'm currently working on is Biohacker's Guide to Smoking
Okay.
Cessation, and that's been taking me down some fascinating paths as far as the substance of nicotine. It's way more complex than we have any idea of the interactions with different hormones in the body and things like that. So nicotine is the perfect nootropic, meaning it's the perfect smart drug in the sense that it simultaneously hits the sympathetic nervous system, which gives you that alertness and focused attention, and it simultaneously hits the parasympathetic nervous system, which gives you that sense of calm and stress relief. So that's why people smoke, is because they're tweaking both branches of their nervous system simultaneously. It's one of the few substances on earth that we know of that can do that.
Really?
So,
It's one of the few that can actually hit both at the same time. That is, man,
yeah,
I can't deny that. I'm going to go out and buy some nicotine. I don't know. I'm tempted to buy some.
I would stay away from it if you could, just because it's so highly
Yeah.
addictive. And so once you have a daily habit, quitting that daily habit is virtually impossible, and it's expensive. You can spend a lot of money on nicotine replacement.
Okay. Note to listeners, I guess.
The other, I just want to throw this in. There are some new psych meds coming out that seem to mimic that. So that'll be interesting to see in the next couple of years. But anyway, just as a side note, if you're addicted to cigarettes, you're not actually addicted to the nicotine in the cigarettes. That is a big component. But the real thing that is causing addiction to smoking cigarettes is the additives.
Really?
And this is my conspiracy theory, but it seems to be true. For example, sorbitol. Sorbitol is a GRAS additive, which means it's generally recognized as safe. And so they can add it to whatever, and it's added to tobacco leaves to keep the cigarettes somewhat moist so they don't dry out. Sorbitol is extremely addictive when it's lit on fire.
Really?
And a simple way, if you're a smoker, to test my theory, go buy some cigarettes with absolutely no additives and see how much you like smoking.
Really? You mean like an American Spirit, for example?
Yeah.
So you're pretty much doing away then with the biohacking one about alcoholism.
I hope to get it done this year. So that's my sort of goal right now. But I'm currently working on the smoking one because, that's currently what I'm struggling with the most. I haven't smoked for about 8 months, but
oh wow,
I still am tempted.
Oh yeah, no, 8 months. I remember I was still tempted to. I still wanted to smoke for sure.
Like, man, I really want a cigarette.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, can you talk a little bit about alcohol? Do you consider yourself then an alcoholic?
Yeah, but I do want to clarify that term. An alcoholic is not what AA will lead you to believe that it is. The science doesn't support this idea of everyone who drinks a little bit fits on this pathway of eventual destruction.
Right.
About 2 billion people in the world drink alcohol every single day, and not all of those people end up in liver failure and death.
And did you experience something like that, liver failure or anything like that?
Yeah, I did have some catastrophic organ failures, pancreatitis
Hmm.
primarily. But the research shows about 72% of people who are alcohol dependent, which means if they don't drink on any given day, they will go into
Hmm.
withdrawals. So alcohol dependent individuals, that's potentially life threatening, by the way. You can die from not drinking if you are dependent on
Oh
alcohol.
yeah.
So I highly recommend close medical supervision if you are
Yeah.
dependent. But 72% of people that are dependent on alcohol um, are only dependent for about 3 to 4 years once in their entire life.
Oh really?
And then they're just done.
So
Yeah, they're
you can
done.
be a temporary, I guess, because yeah, that was actually, to be honest, that was my idea. My thought was that okay, once a person is an alcoholic, then they're always an alcoholic, something like that. But you're saying that it's just a temporary thing.
Yeah, 72% of people, that's simply not true. It's they realize one day this is not working to improve my life. I'm just not going to do it anymore. And they quit without any treatment of any kind and they never drink again.
Wow, it makes me wonder if I was an alcoholic. Anyway, no.
Now,
Wow. Okay.
the other percentage, the remaining percent, whatever 72 minus 100% is, um, those people are more of what I think of when you're talking about a chronic, long term, those individuals tend to be dependent for 3 to 4 years at a time, and it happens over and over
Yeah.
again throughout their life. And so those are the guys who end up homeless with liver failure and things like that. So of the 2 billion people that drink every single day, 72% of them are just going to say, you know what, this is not helping me achieve my life goal. I'm not going to do it anymore.
Yep. Gotcha.
I do fit in the latter category where I have a lifelong problem that I will always have to be cognizant of. So
Yep. Gotcha. And so, do you think I did want to maybe go into a little bit of murky waters and ask, do you think it affected your relationship with your family in any way with getting into that?
oh yeah, I think so. Yeah, definitely were some tough times
Yeah.
there. So hard to see your dad be a homeless alcoholic for sure, which is my profession prior to moving to Lincoln. But then on the other hand, I think that the bounce back, the resiliency is a important lesson for me in my life. And that's really the research that I've been digging into is how do you help people bounce back?
Yeah.
Because especially ER nurses, paramedics, law enforcement, firefighters, these guys see horrific things day in and day out, day in and day out. Suicide rate is high for firefighters.
Really?
The divorce rate is almost 100% for career paramedic firefighters and for ER doctors. The substance abuse rates, are sky high
Hmm.
for our military veterans. And so people that have seen the shit go down over and over again, day in and day out, they are affected by
Yep.
that. And that's really where I want to spend my time as a researcher and an educator. How can we empower people to bounce back?
Yep.
How can we take care of the frontline providers? The people that are absolute heroes in my mind are volunteer firefighters and EMT. Most of our ambulances are driven by people who are doing it for free
Oh wow.
because that's their mission in life. They're absolute heroes and they suffer.
Yeah.
They suffer. Well, I'll just throw a statistic out there. For example, if a firefighter witnesses or cleans up a suicide, one thing we know about suicide is it's a contagious process. It's
Wow.
contagious.
Is that something to do with the vagus nerve then?
Well, we don't know. We don't know, but possibly that would make
Yeah.
sense to me. And so, it's almost like the influenza virus. You're around it too much, you catch it. And so, for a firefighter, at what point has he seen too much shit?
Yeah.
Well, with cleaning up suicide, there's a magic number. The number is 12.
12.
If he's cleaned up 12 suicides, he is then suicidal himself.
Really?
A very high percentage
Like
of
what
the time.
percentage, give or take,
like 50% of those guys will then have chronic suicidality.
Wow. It doesn't, it's not just a temporary thing that, let's say they, help clean up, well, go to a site where there's been a suicide 12 times. After, it doesn't just like fade after time, or is that something that sticks for a while?
It seems to have some sticking power, which is very frightening.
Yeah, no kidding. That's very frightening. Uh, how did we even get onto the topic of firefighters and uh, and all that with
Oh, well, I just was talking about how that does affect people's lives, and the numbers prove it. The ER
yeah.
doctors, the profession with one of the highest suicide completion rates are pediatric oncologists, cancer doctors for kids.
Oh,
It makes sense to me. I mean, they're fighting a losing battle most of the time. They pour their entire life into trying to save these kids' lives, and often don't succeed, and that creates this helplessness. Um, and helplessness and hopelessness are the two fueling emotions for suicide.
well, and do you see that where people have there's some suicidal ideology going on there, but have you seen it happen where there's like a what percentage of them actually go through uh, and actually commit suicide?
Oh, the percentage is so small as to be almost not measurable
Oh, okay.
in reality. And that's an interesting point, because the idea of suicidal
Yeah,
ideation, people who think about it,
yeah,
we're talking 20 to 30 million Americans in any given year. And so that's not the same population as the people who actually do it.
yeah.
And so what we actually know about completers, people who actually get the job done, we don't know a damn thing about them. We do not know.
Really?
And the reason is because we can't study a population who's dead.
Yeah, and they don't really give many indicators beforehand. Is that true, or do they give indicators, or can you tell?
It's so hard to tell. So yeah, but there are some things we look at. Substance abuse, for example, is the heroin overdoses definitely. Whether that was an intended suicide or not, it's hard to tell. But if somebody has an IV heroin problem, they're at a high risk for death. And so there are definitely things we can look at.
Yeah. And you said also that you struggle with bipolar disorder. Is that kind of go along with bipolar? Because do you have you struggled then with suicidal ideation too?
Well, that whole bipolar thing, I've never been actually diagnosed by a doctor.
Okay. Oh, neither have I. But yeah. So
But so yeah, that's a total self-diagnosis. But the interesting thing with any of those diagnoses in the DSM-5, which came out in 2013, that's the most recent Bible of mental illness. Any of those diagnoses, they all have a disclaimer at the bottom of the page, which says if you are currently abusing substances of any kind, then you don't meet this diagnostic criteria. You can't say that someone is bipolar if they are currently alcohol dependent.
really, that is interesting.
So I've been playing with this idea as we do clinicals at nursing school. How many of our patients who have the diagnosis of borderline personality disorder, how many of those people actually have a substance use disorder? Because they don't technically meet that diagnostic criteria if they're high on meth all the time. And so that's
Hmm.
what one of the assignments I have my students look at is dig into this patient's history and find out what substance they're abusing.
Yeah.
And we've been doing this for the last year and a half, and quite honestly haven't found very many people who don't abuse something. And the most common thing is your benzodiazepines, because that's not considered abuse if your doctor prescribes it.
Right. So and it's almost like a rat chase too to find out what is the cause and effect. Is a person quote unquote bipolar because of, or they're showing the symptoms because of this, substance, or are they?
Yeah, or are they
Yeah,
self-medicating?
exactly.
Yeah, so it's hard to know. But so then my premise is just eliminate all the substances of abuse and wait a few years and then see. Guaranteed, most of those people won't fit the diagnostic criteria after they've been sober for say
Oh,
3
really?
years.
Okay, so you're in line then with
Yeah.
the DMV. Is it the DSM?
DSM.
You're also in line with the Department of Motor Vehicles, but
Yeah, they would agree with me too.
I'm sure. So with the DSM, yeah, okay, wow, that's crazy. Do you still diagnose yourself then as bipolar?
I honestly don't. I'm definitely hypomanic, which is a diagnostic criteria for bipolar type 2, meaning I have high energy, grandiose ideas, and things like that.
Yeah.
And so, but the interesting thing with that is there's this discussion that everyone, especially in America, fits that bipolar spectrum somewhere. Because here's the deal: if you're grandiose enough to leave your country, to go to the new country, the United States, to create a better life, that's some pretty serious grandiosity. And then to have the sustained energy levels to get that done, bam, you're hypomanic. If you're an immigrant, which we all are, unless you're a Native American, if you're from an immigrant, you have the genetic predisposition to be bipolar type 2.
Oh
So
wow.
um, just the fact that you're making a podcast, that's pretty grandiose. And then to have the energy to get it done. You're bipolar type
Oh,
2,
I fully
so
admit. I think you're just, yeah, I've probably got some weird form of hypomania. And it sounds like you're saying we have a collective hypomania in the States.
yeah, so the idea is that in America or any country that's primarily made up of immigrant population is more hypomanic, which is part of why we dominate with new business creation and things like that, new technology, because we tend to have a higher percentage of people on the bipolar spectrum. So the question then the DSM would ask is, at what point does this become a disorder?
Right.
Because that's the key, bipolar disorder, and that means it's getting in the way of your life in some way.
Yeah. Wow,
So,
this is fascinating because basically, I mean, in a nutshell, what you're saying is because it's so widespread in the States of probably a lot of us or most of us have hypomania. Because of that, that's why we've been so robust in a number of areas in like commerce and business and
oh, absolutely. So the idea of it being a mental illness is totally subjective. If that person gets so profoundly depressed that they commit suicide, obviously that's a problem. But if they go out and start a company like Facebook, they meet the criteria of bipolar
wow,
2.
that is just fascinating to me. I love it. I think I'm gonna have to put that in the title of this podcast or something. Because seriously, we're all bipolar, and that's the reason why we're doing decently or whatever. Wow, that's really cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so the final question then is: imagine that you were, well, first you have to imagine something that you were visited by an alien who spoke flawless English with the voice of Benedict Cumberbatch, the, UK Sherlock version guy. And after exchanging pleasantries, the alien then demands that you give or him or her or it the most accurate description of how you see and understand life on this planet. And if you don't, they guarantee that you'll lose your eyesight for a year and you may wake up the next morning missing a kidney. And you cannot lie because they can totally tell if you're lying. So basically, the alien is asking, you give them, and you're giving the audience here and myself the most accurate description of how you see and understand life.
If I was visited by an alien, that'd be totally kick-ass, especially if he had a, Sherlock Holmes sort of accent and
Right.
everything. So here's my thoughts on this Earth. We are very limited in our perception of reality by our senses. We can only perceive reality based on what inputs into our brain we get, and we're somewhat limited. For example, we can only see a very narrow spectrum of light waves and things like that. So our perception and senses are very limited, and so we're doing the best we can, sort of muddling through life without being able to have this big picture very well. And one of the things we're limited on is our perception of time. Time is such a bizarre construct, And actually, you were with me when we were talking to our friend Tim Stratton, and he mentioned that physicists have really not been able to prove scientifically, mathematically, that time is truly
Oh yeah, that's right.
linear, that one day comes after the other. And so, as citizens of this planet, we're very much stuck in this idea that tomorrow comes after today, but does it? Um, Mathematically, it makes more sense that time is all happening at
Right.
once. So we're very limited as far as that goes, but that ties back into the suicide discussion and depression discussion, because we know that a suicidal individual that's truly gets the job done, or even somebody that's profoundly depressed, is not processing reality correctly in their perception of the past.
Uh,
They cannot remember, for example, ever being happy. And you can show that person a picture of them being extremely happy, maybe 3 years ago at their daughter's birthday party or whatever, but they don't remember it.
really?
And so we know that with this whole idea of memory is just simply by accessing a memory, our brain changes that
Yep.
memory. And I heard a neuroscientist say here a week or two ago that we don't have the scientific capability to even understand how memory works, and probably won't have that capability for another 100 years. We don't even know what memory is or how it works.
Whoa. Wow.
And so here we are going through life trying to figure out what the fuck is wrong with me. And we don't even know how the brain works yet.
Right.
So, sort of my life mission is to go around helping people to increase their executive
Yep.
functioning, which is the working of their prefrontal cortex. And the best way, easiest way to do that is by increasing the working of your vagus nerve. That's kind of my mission in life. And simple ways to do that: simply sleep better and eliminate all the crap that you eat. We ingest so many toxins on any given day that our body isn't designed to, like high fructose corn syrup or whatever, that it really shuts down our vagus nerve. And that directly impacts things like our social functioning, how nice we are to other people. If our brain shuts down, our prefrontal cortex shuts down, we are in fight or flight mode, which is our crocodile brain. And so other people seem threatening to us. We feel threatened by other people. And we see that dynamic play out in politics and in the broad picture of an entire nation who is scared of
Yeah.
each other. We are, and so then people do really weird things when they're living in their crocodile brain. They lash out at other people. They have road rage. They beat up their spouse, you know. And so that's kind of my mission in life, is if we can increase executive functioning, that will eliminate the alcohol problem in the world. 2 billion people in the world drink alcohol every single day. Just another interesting statistic I've been ruminating on is clean air. Clean air, that's on the World Health Organization's top 10 list. It's a number 10 reason people die in this world. They don't have clean air to breathe. 3 billion people in this world still cook their food over an open fire inside their home.
Yeah. Yep.
And then they die. They die from lung disease and air pollution, indoor air pollution. So we don't even have that problem solved. No wonder they're not able to use their executive functioning, and they're stuck in this self-perpetuating cycle of homelessness and poverty. Because to get out of poverty, you have to have a prefrontal cortex that works. So that's did that answer the question? That's kind of what I would tell this alien. What I see going on is a lot of vagus nerves not working.
The cool thing about your story is you practice what you preach. You know what it's like to be going basically just off of the reptile brain or whatever, to have the prefrontal cortex or executive function just not function properly. So I feel like that gives you a lot more street cred, a lot more cred, to be able to say, hey, this is what needs to happen. And here's why. Because you actually know too. You've researched it, you understand it, you're intelligent. But you've also been in a lot of people's situation before, that in a not so great situation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I agree.
Cool. Dude, well, this has been ridiculously awesome. And I'm really proud and glad that you agreed to do this for my first podcast. I appreciate your time, man. I know you're busy with a million jobs and family, and now you're taking screenwriting courses and who knows what else, and writing a million books too a year. So that's it's freaking awesome, man. You're inspirational. So I hope that listeners out there too are inspired by your message, and inspired really to really think about executive function and how to kind of get past our reptilian responses, especially when you're talking about working with one another and trying to get past political hurdles and things like that. But yeah, so I appreciate it, man.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for having me. It was awesome. I enjoyed it.
Awesome, Josh. Cool. All right, man. Well, we'll talk again. Take care. Hey, thank you so much for checking out this episode of In the Shoes Of. If you like or don't like the podcast, feel free to leave a review or reach out to me. My email is jnickel@intheshoesof.org. I'm Jeremy Nickel, the host and producer of the show. Until the next time, see you later.